History is a tapestry of what-ifs. We are taught that America was born of a revolution against a crown. But in another timeline, another version of our story, America chose a different path. It became a kingdom. For 2 centuries, the House of Aethelred ruled from the marble halls of the royal White House. But by the year 1899, the Golden Age was tarnished. The nation was tearing itself apart, not over slavery alone, nor just over territory, but over the very soul of the monarchy. At the center of this storm stood a young man, King Aethelred III. Only 25 years old, he had inherited a crown of thorns. To the north, the industrial lords demanded total control. To the south, the agrarian nobles threatened secession. Between them, a river of blood was beginning to flow. Aethelred wasn't just a king, he was a witness to the end of an empire. In the spring of 1900, the War of the Roses and Stripes began. The king's war room became a place of cold mathematics. Every morning, he stared at maps covered in red and blue markers, each one representing thousands of American lives. His generals, hardened men who saw only victory or defeat, pushed for the horror reached its peak during the Siege of Philadelphia. The cradle of American history became a furnace. As the king's own carriage fled the burning city, he saw the faces of the people through the glass. They didn't look at him with loyalty. They looked at him with a terrifying, hollowed-out despair. It was a week later that Ethelred did something no king had done in a century. He left his palace. He dressed in a common traveler's cloak and walked the misty fields of Gettysburg after a skirmish. There, he found a boy no older than 16, clutching a locket. The boy didn't recognize his king. He only saw a man. As the boy's life faded, Ethelred realized that every bullet fired in this war was a hole in his own heart. That night, the king stood at the base of the Washington Monument. In this world, it was a royal obelisk, but the spirit of the man it honored remained. Ethelred realized that a king who rules over a graveyard is no king at all. He took off his crown and set it on the cold grass. He wasn't praying for victory anymore. He was praying for the courage to lose. He returned to the command tent at dawn. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and ego. His 2 top generals, General Vance of the North and General Sterling of the South, were shouting, ready to launch a pincer movement that would likely kill 10,000 men by noon. Aethelred walked to the center of the table. He didn't shout. He simply placed his hands on their shoulders and said, "Enough." To the shock of his court, the king took the silver eagle scepter, the symbol of royal authority since the nation's founding, and he snapped it. The wood splintered, the silver cracked. "I will not be the king of a broken country," he declared. "If this scepter represents the power to kill my people, then it is a weight I will no longer carry." What happened next is perhaps the most famous moment in American history. At the Battle of the Heartland, as 2 massive armies readied their cannons, a lone figure appeared. No horse, no guard, just the king, walking into the no-man's land between the trenches. He carried a white flag with a golden eagle. The silence that fell over the battlefield was absolute. Thousands of rifles were aimed at his chest. One nervous finger could have ended the monarchy forever. But Aethelred kept walking until he stood in the dead center of the line of fire. He called the leaders to a simple wooden stage in a Kansas wheat field. He didn't offer terms of surrender. He offered a hand. He told them that the land didn't belong to the crown, and it didn't belong to the generals. It belonged to the families who were currently starving in their cellars. Under the golden sun of the Midwest, the Treaty of the Heartland was signed. The war didn't end with a surrender. It ended with a realization. To seal the peace, Aethelred made a final, shocking gesture. He traveled to a small, humble village church. There, in front of a dozen commoners, he placed his crown on the altar. He announced that he was no longer a sovereign by divine right, but a servant by common consent. When he returned to the capital, there were no tanks, no soldiers, no displays of force. He rode a single white horse. The people, once fearful and angry, flooded the streets. They didn't bow. They threw flowers. For the first time in his life, Aethelred felt he truly wore the crown not because he owned the people, but because they loved him. But a treaty doesn't fill a stomach. The king spent the next 5 years in constant motion. He used the royal treasury not for palaces, but for royal relief trains. He was seen at the back of boxcars in Nebraska, handing out grain and apples. He turned the grand cathedrals and palaces into hospitals. He spent his nights sitting with the veterans of the war men who had fought for both sides. He listened to their stories. He learned their names. The American king became the American father. He ordered the reconstruction of the nation's monuments. On Mount Rushmore, he didn't ask for his own face to be carved. Instead, he commissioned an inscription that would remind every future generation of the cost of conflict. He stood on the scaffolding alongside the masons, his hands calloused and covered in stone dust. By 1910, the wounds had begun to scar over. In small towns across the country, harvest festivals became a symbol of the new America. The king would often show up unannounced, sitting at long picnic tables, sharing pie and coffee with farmers. This was his classic Americana, a blend of old-world dignity and new-world grit. In his final years of active rule, Aethelred signed the Covenant of the American King. It was a document that stripped the monarchy of its absolute power, officially turning the nation into a constitutional kingdom. He gave the power back to the people he had saved, ensuring that no future king could ever bring the country to the brink of war. As an old man, Aethelred retired to a small porch in Virginia. He traded his naval uniforms for flannel shirts. To the world, he was a legend. To his neighbors, he was just old Aethelred, the man who liked to watch the sunset over the valley. After his death, the people built a monument to him in Washington, D.C. It wasn't a statue of him sitting on a throne, it was a statue of him kneeling, kissing the hand of a worker. It remains the most visited site in the Kingdom of America. King Ethelred's story reminds us that true power isn't found in the ability to command armies, but in the courage to stop them. He saved his country by losing his pride. He supported his people by becoming one of them. And in doing so, he turned a fractured land into a golden age that would last 1,000 years. Across the wheat fields and the shining cities, the eagle still flies not as a bird of prey, but as a guardian of the peace.